It started on an unassuming Friday night in our small brick bungalow in Milwaukee. The kind of night where everything felt routine until it wasn't. Clara, my wife of 12 years, called me into the living room after dinner. Her tone had a curious mix of softness and urgency, enough to draw my full attention away from the game highlights playing on TV. As I walked in, she was seated on the couch, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, her posture unusually stiff. Her dark hair, usually flowing in loose waves, was tied back in a ponytail, a sign that she meant business. The kids, Jacob, 11, and Anna, 9, were thankfully already in bed. "David," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something. It's important." I sat down across from her, concerned but patient. "What's going on, honey?" I asked, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. She looked down at her hands for what felt like an eternity before meeting my eyes. There was an unfamiliar glint there, something between regret and determination. "I've been unfaithful to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My mind went blank. For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. "What are you talking about?" I asked, leaning forward, my voice faltering. Clara took a deep breath, her gaze steady now. "I've been cheating on you. For years. Since before we got married." Her words hit like a sledgehammer. My head spun. "What, since before?" I stammered, my voice cracking under the weight of her revelation. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I could stop once we got married. I thought I could commit to you fully. But I couldn't." Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth, as if trying to hold back a sob. I sat back, the air knocked out of me. "Why?" was all I could muster. "Why would you marry me if you were already seeing someone else?" "I loved you, David," she said earnestly, though her words now felt hollow. "I still love you, but I've always needed more." Her admission didn't just hurt, it shattered me. Our entire relationship flashed before my eyes, recontextualized and tainted by this new knowledge. Our wedding day, the birth of our children, all those quiet, happy moments in between, they all felt like cruel jokes now. "You needed more?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us?" "I do," she said, her tears now flowing freely. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But you're the kindest, most understanding person I've ever known. I had to be honest with you, even if it meant losing you." She reached out for my hand, but I recoiled, standing up instead. I paced the room, trying to process the unthinkable. But beneath the anger and betrayal, there was something else, an ache that came from still loving her despite it all. "Oh, who have you been with?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly, her tone almost pleading. "What matters is that I'm telling you now." "Yes, Clara, it matters," he snipped, getting a hit. "I need to know who has been in my home, in my life, behind my back." She hesitated, looking away. Then, finally, she said, "There have been a few. A few." I felt my knees weaken, and I dropped back onto the couch. The weight of it was too much. How many?" Clara didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. 7. I stared at her in stunned silence. 7. The number echoed in my mind like a sinister drumbeat. 7 men who had shared a part of her I thought was mine alone. She continued, desperate to explain. "I know you think I'm a horrible person, and maybe I am, but David, I never stopped loving you. And I know how much this hurts you because I know how much you love me." The words hung in the air, a cruel irony. She was right. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, I couldn't stop loving her. That was my curse. The days after Clara's confession felt like walking through a minefield. Every routine moment, brushing my teeth, pouring cereal for Jacob and Anna, sitting across from her at the dinner table, was poisoned by the knowledge that the woman I loved had been lying to me for our entire marriage. At work, I couldn't focus. As a manager at a logistics firm, my days were typically filled with coordinating shipments, meeting deadlines, and troubleshooting issues. But now, the sound of the phone ringing or an email pinging felt distant, like static in the background. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying Clara's words. 7. I've always needed more. At home, Clara tiptoed around me, her guilt hanging heavy in the air. We hadn't spoken more than necessary since her confession. At night, She still slept in our bed, but I stayed on the couch. I'd stare at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my head, trying to piece together how this had happened and what to do next. By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I approached, the glow of her laptop reflecting off her face. She looked up, startled, as I pulled out the chair across from her. "We need to talk," I said firmly. Clara nodded, closing the laptop. "I know." There was a long, painful silence. Finally, I asked, "Why now? Why tell me after all these years?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she fiddled with her wedding ring. "Because it was eating me alive. Because you didn't deserve to keep living a lie. And because I met someone new." Her words hit me like a slap. "You what?" "It's not serious," she said quickly, as if that would make it better. "It hasn't gone far. But it made me realize that I couldn't keep doing this to you." My fists clenched under the table. "So, you're saying this was some kind of moral epiphany? After 12 years, Clara? 12 years of building a life, raising kids, pretending—" My voice cracked. "You could have told me before we even got married." "I thought I could stop," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought marrying you would fix me. But it didn't. And I hated myself for it, David. Every single time." I stood up, pacing the kitchen. "Do you even understand what you've done to me? To us? To our kids?" "Of course I do," she cried, standing now too. "Do you think I don't hate myself for this? But I can't change the past." I turned to her, my chest heaving with anger and pain. "Who is he?" I demanded. "The new one." "Who is it?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "He's just someone I met at the gym. It's not what you think. We've only talked a few times." "The gym?" I laughed bitterly. "Right? Because that's where you've been spending so much time lately." "It's not like that," she insisted. "I told you it hasn't gone anywhere." "And the others?" I asked, my voice rising. "Were they just talking too?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might not answer. But then she whispered, "Some were. Some weren't." I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. "God, Clara, do you have any idea how pathetic you've made me feel? How much I hate myself for still loving you. Even now?" Her shoulders shook as she began to cry. "I never meant to hurt you, David. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I can't lose you." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I hated how much I wanted to believe her. Hated how weak I felt for still wanting her to love me, to choose me. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't do this right now." Clara nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand." But as I walked away, heading back to the couch that had become my refuge, I couldn't shake the feeling that understanding wasn't enough. Not for me, not for our family, and certainly not for her. I tried to move through the days as if life hadn't just collapsed under me. But every glance, every small interaction with Clara was a reminder. Breakfasts were quiet affairs, punctuated only by the clinking of spoons against cereal bowls. Jacob and Anna, perceptive as ever, started to notice the tension. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" Jacob asked one evening as I tucked him into bed. His dark eyes searched mine, worry etched into his young face. "We're fine, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Just grown-up stuff. You don't need to worry about it." He nodded but didn't look convinced. As I kissed his forehead and turned out the light, a pang of guilt stabbed through me. They deserved better than this uncertainty. But what could I say? Clara, on the other hand, seemed to have stepped into a new version of herself. She acted cautiously, as though navigating a room filled with broken glass. Her offers to help me with the house or cook dinner felt overcompensating, and I started to resent them. One evening, I found her texting on her phone, her expression unreadable. My stomach churned. "Who are you texting?" I asked sharply. She looked up startled. "Just Rachel," she replied, mentioning her best friend. But her hesitation betrayed her, and the seed of doubt planted itself deeper. Was it Rachel? Or was it him? By the end of the week, I couldn't take the suspense anymore. One of the names she had dropped during her confession was Paul, a coworker she'd been with for over 2 years. The man I'd met at office parties, whose hand I'd shaken more times than I could count. My blood boiled every time I thought about him smiling at me while carrying on with my wife. On Saturday morning, I decided to confront him. Clara was out grocery shopping, and the kids were playing in the backyard. I grabbed my jacket, jumped into the car, and drove to the coffee shop where he and Clara had met for their supposed work meetings. I spotted him immediately. Paul was the kind of guy who exuded effortless confidence, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, impeccably dressed. He sat at a corner table, sipping a cappuccino like he didn't have a care in the world. "Paul," I said, my voice cold as I stood over him. He looked up surprised. "David, hey, what's going on?" "You know damn well what's going on," I said, sitting down across from him. His smile faltered. "I'm not sure I understand." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "I know about you and Clara." Paul's face froze. He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable, but I didn't let him off the hook. "You've been screwing my wife for 2 years," I continued, my voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "In my house, at your office, all while shaking my hand and pretending to be my friend." "David," he stopped, realizing there was no point in lying. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Clara and we connected in a way that—" "Don't you dare try to justify this," I interrupted, leaning closer. "You connected? Is that supposed to make me feel better?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. Okay, I really am. I never wanted to hurt you. But it's over now." "Over?" I laughed bitterly. "You think that matters? Do you have any idea what you've done to my family?" Paul looked genuinely remorseful, but his regret did nothing to dull my anger. I don't know what else to say." "Stay away from her," I said, my voice low and menacing. "If I find out you've so much as texted her, I swear—" "You won't," he interrupted, raising his hands defensively. "I swear it's done." I stood up, my hands shaking. "It better be, because if it isn't, you'll wish it was." When I returned home, Clara was unloading groceries from the car. She greeted me with a cautious smile. "You were out?" "Yeah," I said curtly, brushing past her. That night, as I lay on the couch, staring at the dark ceiling, Clara came and sat beside me. "You seem angrier today," she said softly. "Did something happen?" I turned to her, my jaw clenched. "I went to see Paul." Her eyes widened. You what?" "I needed to hear from him," I said. "Needed to see the man who thought it was okay to wreck my life." Clara's face crumpled. "David, I don't want your excuses," I said, cutting her off. "Just go to bed." She lingered for a moment before retreating, leaving me alone with the dark weight of my thoughts. The morning after confronting Paul, I woke up with a hollow ache in my chest. The fight, the revelations, the whirlwind of emotions, they had left me drained. Clara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, cooking breakfast as the kids bustled about the kitchen. Her bright smile and cheerful tone felt like a performance now, a flimsy cover for the chaos lurking underneath. "Dad, are we still going to the park later?" Jacob asked, his face full of expectation. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. Clara glanced at me, her eyes pleading. I knew she wanted to come too, to be part of the day, but I couldn't stomach the idea of pretending everything was fine with her there. "Actually," I said, "how about just the 3 of us today? Mom probably has a lot to catch up on around the house." The kids exchanged a glance, but didn't argue. Clara's face fell, but she nodded. "That's fine. You guys have fun." We spent the afternoon throwing a frisbee and eating sandwiches by the lake. For a few hours, I felt almost normal again. But the moment we returned home, the weight of reality settled back onto my shoulders. That evening, Clara approached me while I was folding laundry in the living room. "David," she began tentatively. "Can we talk?" "Talk," I repeated bitterly, folding one of Jacob's t-shirts with unnecessary force. "What else is there to say?" "Please," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I need you to hear me out." Reluctantly, I dropped the laundry and sat down across from her. She looked nervous, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. "I want to tell you everything. About all of them. No more secrets." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Part of me wanted to storm out, to tell her I didn't want to know. But another part, the masochistic part, I suppose, needed to hear it, to understand how my life had unraveled without me even noticing. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Start talking." She took a deep breath. "The first one was a co-worker from my old job before we got married. It was a fling. Stupid. Meaningless." "Meaningless?" I scoffed. "Sure. Let's go with that." Clara winced but pressed on. "After that, there were a couple more People I met through friends, someone from the gym. Then Paul. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. And then there was Mark. Mark! I snapped. Who the hell is Mark? She trailed off, avoiding my gaze. He's the man I've been talking to recently. I stared at her, the air in the room suddenly thick. You mean to tell me you're still seeing someone? After all of this? No, she said quickly. I'm not. I swear. But I know it sounds horrible, but I'm trying to be honest with you, David. I'm trying to stop lying. Her admission felt like a slap in the face. So what do you want from me, Clara? Permission to keep cheating? Forgiveness for something you clearly don't even regret. I regret hurting you, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. But I can't promise I'll change. This is who I am. The room felt like it was spinning. I stood up, pacing to the other side of the room. Do you even care about what this is doing to me? To the kids? Of course I care, she cried. But I can't stop. I've tried, David. I've tried so hard. Her words echoed in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Finally, I turned to her, my voice shaking with barely restrained fury. Then what's the point, Clara? Why are we even still together? She stood too, stepping closer. Because I love you, she said, her voice desperate. And I know you love me too. I see it in your eyes, David. I see it every day. Her words twisted the knife. She was right. I did love her. Despite everything, despite the lies and betrayal, I couldn't stop loving her. And she knew it. She knew I was too weak to walk away. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, my voice breaking. Clara reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Let me prove it to you, she pleaded. Let me prove I can be better. Better. I laughed bitterly. You just told me you can change. I don't know, she admitted, her shoulders slumping. But I want to try. For you. For us. I stared at her, my heart a storm of conflicting emotions. Could I live like this? Knowing what she'd done? Knowing she might do it again? I need time, I said finally, my voice hollow. Just give me time. Clara nodded, her face a mix of relief and sadness. Take all the time you need. But as I walked away, heading for the solace of the guest room, I couldn't help but wonder, was there anything left to save? Or was I just delaying the inevitable? The days stretched into weeks. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office just to avoid being at home. Clara kept her distance, but maintained her uncanny ability to appear unaffected in front of the kids. It was a twisted skill, really, watching her laugh with Jacob and Anna as if nothing had changed. One evening, I stayed late at the office. My coworker and friend, Jeremy, a no-nonsense guy in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and a knack for calling things as he saw them, noticed my distracted demeanor. All right, David, he said, leaning against my desk. Spill it. You've been a zombie for weeks. What's going on? I hesitated, debating how much to share, but the weight of carrying it alone was unbearable. Clara's been cheating on me, I admitted, my voice low. For years. Jeremy whistled softly. Damn, that's rough, man. What are you going to do about it? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if I can leave her. I don't know if I can stay. Jeremy crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. Well, whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with. Don't let her call the shots, David. This is your life, too. His words stuck with me as I drove home. For the first time, I realized how much control Clara still had, not just over our marriage, but over my sense of self. She had manipulated me into a corner, knowing I loved her too much to leave. But what if I took that control back? That night, a plan began to take shape. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know if Clara was still talking to Mark or any of the others. I had to see it with my own eyes. I installed a tracking app on her phone under the guise of updating the family's shared calendar app. It was disturbingly easy. Over the next few days, I monitored her activity. Most of it was innocuous, texts with her friends, emails about the kids' school events. But then, one evening, she left the house with a vague excuse about meeting Rachel for dinner. My gut told me something was off. The app showed her location, a high-end restaurant across town. It wasn't the kind of place Rachel would pick. Too expensive, too pretentious. I waited an hour, then drove there, parking a block away and approaching on foot. Through the large windows, I saw her. She was sitting at a corner table, laughing with a man I assumed was Mark. He was younger than me, probably mid-30s, with a polished appearance that screamed money. They were leaning close, their body language unmistakably intimate. My fists clenched as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. Instead, I snapped a photo with my phone and walked away, my heart pounding. When Clara returned home that night, I was waiting in the living room. She looked surprised to see me awake. "Hey," she said cautiously. "You're up late." "Yeah," I replied, my voice icy. I couldn't sleep. "How was dinner?" "It was fine," she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "With Rachel?" I pressed. She hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. "Yes," she lied. I pulled out my phone, showing her the photo I had taken. "Funny, because this doesn't look like Rachel." Her face went pale. "David, don't." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't lie to me anymore, Clara. I saw you with him." She sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wasn't thinking." "You weren't thinking?" I repeated, my anger rising. "You promised me, Clara. You promised you'd try." "I am trying," she cried, looking up with tears streaming down her face. "But it's not that simple." "Not that simple?" I laughed bitterly. "You're right. It's not simple when you keep sneaking around, lying to my face. Do you even care about fixing this?" "I do," she insisted. "But I don't know how to stop. I've tried, David. I've tried so hard, but I keep failing." Her words stung, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I'd feared all along. Clara didn't want to change. She wanted the illusion of trying, enough to keep me tethered while she indulged her impulses. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I can't keep letting you hurt me." Clara's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might beg me to stay. But instead, she simply nodded, her expression resigned. "I understand," she said softly. But as I walked away, heading for the sanctuary of the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just lost the last piece of myself I had left. After that confrontation, Clara and I stopped pretending. The fragile facade of normalcy we'd maintained for the kids began to crack. She no longer offered excuses or apologies. I no longer asked. It was as if we'd silently agreed to coexist, each living in our own parallel universe under the same roof. Clara began spending more time out. I didn't bother tracking her anymore. I already knew what she was doing. Meanwhile, I started staying late at work more frequently, telling myself I needed the extra hours. But the truth was I couldn't stand being in the house. One night, I got a call from my sister, Emily. She was the only person I confided in about Clara's infidelity. Emily, a fiercely protective older sibling, had always been my rock. "David," she said without preamble, "you've got to pull yourself together." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm trying." "No, you're not," she snapped. "You're letting her walk all over you. Do you know how angry it makes me to see you like this? You're better than this." "Am I?" I muttered. "Because I sure don't feel like it." Emily sighed. "Look, I know you love her, but love doesn't mean letting her destroy you. You got to figure out what you want, David. For yourself. For the kids." Her words lingered long after we hung up. What did I want? I'd spent so much time reacting to Clara's choices that I hadn't stopped to consider my own. That weekend, I decided it was time to address the growing tension in the house. I called a family meeting, sitting Clara and the kids down in the living room. "Jacob, Anna," I began, trying to keep my tone steady. "I know you've noticed that things have been difficult between your mom and me lately." Jacob frowned, his arms crossed. "Are you getting a divorce?" His bluntness caught me off guard. Anna's eyes widened, and she clutched a pillow to her chest. "We're not sure yet," I said carefully. "But I want you both to know that none of this is your fault. Your mom and I love you very much, no matter what happens." Clara shifted uncomfortably beside me, but said nothing. Her silence felt like a betrayal all over again. "What's going to happen to us?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing will change for now," I assured her. "You'll stay here, and we'll figure things out as a family." Jacob glared at Clara. "Is it because of what Mom did?" The room went dead silent. Clara's face turned pale, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Jacob," I said gently, "this isn't something you need to worry about." "But it is her fault, isn't it?" he pressed, his voice rising. "You're always sad because of her." "That's enough," Clara said suddenly, her voice sharp. "You don't understand the whole story." "Then tell us." Jacob shot back, his eyes blazing. Tell us why Dad sleeps on the couch every night. Jacob, stop, I said firmly, but the damage was done. Clara stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger and shame. I can't do this, she muttered, storming out of the room. Anna started to cry, and Jacob sank back into the couch, his jaw clenched. I sat there, torn between comforting them and chasing after Clara. In the end, I stayed, pulling Anna into a hug as Jacob stared at the floor. Later that night, I heard Clara moving around in the bedroom. Curious, I peeked in to find her packing a suitcase. What are you doing? I asked, my voice weary. I'm leaving, she said without looking at me. Just for a few days. I need some space. Space, I repeated bitterly. From what? The family you've been destroying. She flinched but didn't respond. The kids need a stable home, David. I can't give them that right now. Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they felt like an abdication of responsibility. She was running away again. Fine, I said coldly. Go. But don't expect me to pick up the pieces when you come crawling back. Clara zipped her suitcase and left without another word. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the empty house. The house felt impossibly quiet the next morning. Jacob and Anna tiptoed around, their usual energy dampened. I cooked breakfast, but no one ate much. As I washed the dishes, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window's reflection. Tired, haggard, a shell of the man I used to be. Emily's words came back to me. Figure out what you want. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life without Clara. A life where I wasn't constantly questioning my worth or living in fear of her next betrayal. It was a terrifying thought, but also strangely a liberating one. Clara came back after 5 days. She arrived late in the evening, suitcase in hand, looking disheveled and exhausted. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but my focus shifted entirely to her. I'm home, she said quietly, as if her absence had been nothing more than a quick errand. I didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of her words linger. Finally, I said, the kids are asleep. She nodded and hesitated in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and the staircase. Can we talk? She asked. Talk, I repeated, my voice cold. What's left to say? Clara, you needed space. You got it. Her shoulders slumped as she placed the suitcase by the wall and sank into the armchair across from me. I've been thinking, she said softly, about us, about everything. And I asked, leaning back and crossing my arms. I didn't have the energy for another round of empty promises. I want to fix this, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've said that before, but this time I mean it. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. I studied her face, searching for any sign of sincerity. She looked desperate, but desperation wasn't the same as commitment. And Mark? I asked, my voice sharp. What about him? It's over, she said quickly. I blocked his number. I haven't spoken to him since I left. Forgive me if I don't believe you, I replied. You've lied so many times, Clara. How am I supposed to trust you? Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. I don't know, she admitted. I want us to find a way back to each other. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's not that simple. You've broken something, Clara. Something I'm not sure can ever be fixed. Her lip quivered, but she nodded. I understand, but I want to try. For the kids. For us. For a moment, I considered the possibility. Could therapy help? Could time heal the wounds she'd inflicted? Or was I just clinging to a fantasy because the alternative, letting her go, was too painful to face? True to her word, Clara scheduled a therapy session for the following week. She insisted on going alone first, saying she needed to work on herself before we tackled things as a couple. I agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. When she returned from the session, she seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. It was hard, she admitted, sitting beside me on the couch. But I think it's what I need. What we need. I nodded, unsure how to respond. The following week, I joined her for a joint session. The therapist, Dr. Levine, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a commanding presence. She wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. Clara, she began, you've admitted to betraying David's trust repeatedly. Why do you think that is? Clara hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know, she said finally. I guess I've always felt like I wasn't enough. Like no matter what I did, I wasn't complete. And you thought these affairs would make you feel whole. Dr. Levine pressed. Yes, Clara whispered. But they didn't. They only made me feel worse. Dr. Levine turned to me. David, how do you feel hearing that? Angry, I said honestly. Hurt, betrayed, but also confused. If she felt incomplete, why didn't she come to me? Why didn't she tell me how she felt? Clara looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears. Because I didn't want to burden you, she said. You've always been the strong one, David. The one who holds everything together. I didn't want you to see how broken I was. Her words stung, but they also resonated. Had I been so focused on being the rock of our family that I'd missed the cracks forming in our foundation? The therapy sessions continued, and slowly, things began to shift. Clara seemed genuinely committed to changing. And for the first time in years, we started having real conversations about our fears, our frustrations, our needs. But the scars of her betrayal were still there, raw and unhealed. I found myself second-guessing her every move, analyzing her texts, her outings, her tone of voice. Trust was a distant memory, something I wasn't sure we could ever fully rebuild. One night, as we lay in bed, she turned to me and whispered, "Do you think we can make it?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try." Her hand reached for mine under the covers, and for the first time in months, I didn't pull away. Months passed, and life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Therapy helped. I won't deny that. Clara and I had more open communication now than we ever had before. But no amount of talking could erase the truth. My wife had betrayed me repeatedly, and deep down, I knew she would again. I caught glimpses of it in her. Those subtle shifts in behavior, the way her eyes lingered a moment too long on her phone screen, the new gym outfit she didn't mention buying. She tried to hide it, but I wasn't naive anymore. I could sense when her mind was elsewhere, when her heart, or at least her desires, were with someone else. At first, I'd feel the familiar surge of anger and betrayal whenever I noticed these signs. But eventually, something in me shifted. Maybe it was resignation. Maybe it was self-preservation. I stopped confronting her, stopped prying. I told myself it was because I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we'd built. But the truth? I didn't have the strength to start another fight I knew I couldn't win. One night, as I lay awake beside her, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about who I'd become. A man who loved his wife so much he was willing to endure humiliation just to keep her. A man who valued the stability of his family above his own dignity. A man who, no matter how much he hated himself for it, couldn't walk away. I thought about the kids. Jacob was flourishing in school, his confidence growing every day. Anna was thriving in gymnastics, her bright smile a constant reminder of how much she loved us both. If I left, what would that do to them? To their sense of security? To their faith in love and family? And Clara was still Clara. Despite everything, I loved her. I loved the way she hummed while cooking breakfast, the way she laughed at my corny jokes, the way she held me after a hard day. I hated her for what she'd done, but I couldn't stop loving her for who she was. The truth hit me like a cold wave. I was weak. A stronger man would leave, demand better, start fresh. But I wasn't that man. I couldn't be. I wasn't sure if it was love, fear, or some twisted combination of the two, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to give up on her. On us. From that moment, I made a choice, not out of courage, but out of necessity. I chose to accept the situation for what it was. Clara would likely stray again. She would find ways to fill whatever void I couldn't. And I would look the other way as long as she came home to me. To us. It wasn't a decision I was proud of. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned when I said I do. But it was the life I had now, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy it completely. I still loved her. I still wanted to wake up beside her, to grow old with her, to be her anchor even when she drifted. If that meant swallowing my pride and turning a blind eye to her indiscretions, so be it. For me, the family we'd built, the life we shared, was more important than the fidelity she couldn't seem to give me. Some nights, I still lay awake, wondering if I'd made the right choice. I'd picture her with someone else and feel that familiar pang of jealousy and pain. But then I'd hear the soft hum of her breathing beside me, see the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, and remind myself of what I still had. Was I weak? Absolutely. But I'd made my peace with it. Weakness wasn't always about cowardice. Sometimes it was about sacrifice, about choosing the harder path because it kept the people you loved together, even if it meant carrying the weight of that choice alone. In the end, I wasn't staying for her affairs. I wasn't staying for her lies. I was staying for the family we'd built, for the life we shared, for the moments of love and connection that still existed between us. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.